My daughter told me she wished I was dead. Not in a fight. Not in some heated argument where words fly and nobody means what they say. No, she said it calmly, over coffee, in the house I helped pay for, on my birthday. She looked me right in the eyes and told me her life would be easier if I just disappeared. And the worst part? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just picked up my purse, walked to my car, and sat there for 40 minutes staring at nothing. Because some part of me, some horrible, buried part, had been waiting for her to say it. Before we go any further, if this story hits you, if you've ever given everything to someone and got nothing back but silence or cruelty, hit that like button. Drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And please, stay until the end, because what happened next? I never saw it coming. Nobody did. I want to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully, because this is not a story about a poor old woman crying into her pillow. This is a story about what happens when you finally wake up after 34 years of sleepwalking through your own life, handing pieces of yourself to someone who never once said thank you. Not once. And I need to tell it from the beginning. From the morning I showed up at my daughter's front door carrying a $48 strawberry cake and a heart full of something I didn't even have a name for yet. It was October 14th, my 67th birthday. I remember the sky was that pale kind of gray that makes everything look washed out, like even the weather couldn't be bothered to show up properly. I'd been awake since 5, which is normal for me. 31 years of nursing does that to you. Your body never forgets the shift schedule, even when the shifts are done. So I was up early, standing in my kitchen in that apartment on Birch Street, the small one with the radiator that clicks all night, and I was frosting a cake. Now let me explain something. I didn't frost that cake for myself. I frosted it for Lila, my daughter, my only child. Because even on my own birthday, even at 67 years old, I was still doing things for her. That's who I was. That's who I had always been. Eleanor Shaw, the woman who gives, the woman who shows up, the woman who never, ever says no. The cake was strawberry with cream cheese frosting, Lila's favorite, not mine. Mine is lemon, if anyone's asking. Nobody ever asked. I put on my nice blouse, the navy one with the little pearl buttons that I bought at a consignment shop 2 years ago because I couldn't justify spending full price on myself, even though I'd just written a check for $9,000 to cover Lila's kitchen renovation. I did my hair, put on lipstick, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, you look like someone's grandmother. Which I was. 2 grandchildren, Theo, who was 9, and Margot, who was 6. Beautiful kids. The only people in that whole family who ever looked happy to see me walk through a door. I drove 35 minutes to Lila's house, the house on Wexford Lane. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a yard with a fence that Grant, that's Lila's husband, never got around to staining. I knew every inch of that house. I should. I put the down payment on it, $42,000. My retirement savings handed over in a cashier's check while Grant stood in the kitchen drinking a beer and didn't say a word. Not thank you, not we'll pay you back. Just stood there with his Budweiser and his silence like I was some kind of ATM with a heartbeat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the morning. I pulled into the driveway at 9:15. Lila's car was there. Grant's truck was gone, which was fine. I preferred it when Grant wasn't around. He had this way of looking at me, over the top of his phone, always over the top of his phone, like I was furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address, like I was taking up space in his life and he was too polite or too lazy to say so. I grabbed the cake from the passenger seat. I'd also brought a bag of groceries because last time I was here, the fridge had 3 condiment bottles and a gallon of expired milk, and my grandchildren deserved to eat real food. So I had eggs, bread, fruit, some of that good cheddar Theo likes, and a bag of those little tangerines Margot peels by herself now because she's so proud of being a big girl. The front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked, which drove me crazy. I'd told Lila 100 times, lock your door. You have children in this house. She'd roll her eyes like I was being dramatic. That was her favorite thing to do when I talked, roll her eyes. Like everything I said was a performance she hadn't bought tickets for. I stepped inside. The house smelled like stale coffee and something sweet, maybe a candle, One of those vanilla ones Lila buys at the home goods store where she spends money she doesn't have on things nobody needs. The living room was a mess, toys on the floor, a cereal bowl on the couch cushion, a stack of mail on the dining table that looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. "Lila," I called out. "It's Mom!" No answer. I set the cake on the counter, put the groceries down, started putting things away because that's what I do. I organize, I clean, I fix. I make things better for everyone around me while my own apartment has a leak under the bathroom sink I haven't called the landlord about because I've been too busy worrying about Lila's mortgage payment. "Lila? I'm in here." Her voice came from the back of the house. The sunroom. That was the room she'd had added 2 years ago. The one I gave her $6,000 toward because Grant said they couldn't afford the contractor's full bid, and Lila called me crying, saying the kids needed a play space, and what was I supposed to do? Say no? I had never said no. Not once in 34 years. That word didn't exist in my vocabulary when it came to my daughter. I walked to the sunroom, and there she was, Lila Monroe, 34 years old, sitting in a wicker chair with her phone in her hand, wearing a silk robe at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Her hair pulled up in one of those messy buns that probably took 20 minutes to make look effortless. She didn't stand up. She didn't hug me. She looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who showed up during your lunch break. "Hi, Mom." "Happy Tuesday," I said. I was smiling. I was always smiling. "I brought cake." "I saw." "And groceries. Your fridge was looking a little sad last time." She sighed. That sigh. If you've ever had someone sigh at you like your existence is an inconvenience, you know the sigh I'm talking about. It's not tired. It's not frustrated. It's dismissal. Pure, cold, casual dismissal. "Mom, you don't need to keep bringing groceries. We're fine." "I know you're fine. I just thought the kids might want some." "The kids are at school." "I know that. I was going to see them later. I thought maybe after school we could do something. It's my birthday." She looked at me, and something shifted in her face. Not softness, not guilt, something else. Something I'd never seen before, or maybe something I'd been seeing for years and just refused to name. "Right," she said. "Your birthday." "You forgot." It wasn't a question. I could see it. The way she pressed her lips together, the way her eyes darted to her phone and back. She forgot. "I didn't forget," she said. "I've just been busy. Grant and I are dealing with some stuff." "What stuff?" Just, stuff, Mom. Financial stuff. The mortgage is behind again, and how far behind?" 2 months. My stomach dropped. 2 months. I had given them $8,000 6 months ago, specifically to catch up on the mortgage. $8,000 that I pulled from my savings, my actual savings, not the emergency fund, the long-term savings that was supposed to carry me through my 70s and 80s when my body finally gave out from all those years of 12-hour shifts and double weekends. "Leela, I gave you money for that. In April, $8,000. What happened?" She shifted in her chair. "Things came up." "What things?" "Grant's truck needed repairs, and Margot's dance classes, and the credit card bills were the credit cards." I closed my eyes. "How much?" "Mom, I didn't ask you to come here and interrogate me." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking because I gave you $8,000 and you told me it was for the mortgage, and now you're telling me the mortgage is 2 months behind. So where did the money go?" "It went where it needed to go," her voice snapped. Just like that, like a rubber band pulled too tight. "You don't get to hand me money and then audit how I spend it. That's not how gifts work." "It wasn't a gift, Lila. You said it was a loan." "Well, it felt like a gift at the time." I stared at her. I stared at my daughter. This person I raised alone after her father left when she was 3. This person I worked double shifts for so she could have braces and ballet lessons and a college education. This person I gave my body and my youth and my savings to. And I felt something crack, not break. Not yet. Just crack. Like a windshield hit by a rock on the highway. The damage is done, but the glass holds. For now. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay. We'll figure it out." "There's nothing to figure out. We need some space. Grant says you're too involved." Grant says. Yes, Grant says, and I agree with him. Grant, who hasn't held a steady job in 3 years. Grant, who spent $200 on fantasy football last month. That Grant has opinions about how involved I am in helping you keep a roof over my grandchildren's heads. See, this is exactly what he's talking about. You come in here, you bring your cake and your groceries and your opinions, and you make us feel like we can't do anything without you. Maybe that's because you can't. The words came out before I could stop them, and they hit. I saw them hit. Lila's face went white, then red, and her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working under her skin. Get out. Lila, I said get out. It's my birthday. And that's when she said it. The thing I will never unhear. The sentence that split my life into before and after. She didn't scream it. She didn't throw it like a weapon. She said it the way you'd mention the weather or the time of day. Casual. Almost bored. You know what, Mom? Sometimes I think my life would just be easier if you weren't around anymore. If you just weren't here. No more guilt trips. No more showing up uninvited. No more keeping score of every dollar you ever gave us. Just gone. The room went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. That ringing quiet you get after an explosion when the air itself feels stunned. I looked at my daughter, and she looked back at me with no apology in her eyes. None. Zero. She meant it. Maybe not the dying part, maybe not literally, but the sentiment? The wish for my erasure? That was real. That was as real as the floor under my feet. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I tried again. My lips moved, but my voice had left. It had packed up and gone somewhere safer, somewhere it wouldn't be used to beg for love from someone who had just told me to stop existing. I walked out of the sunroom, through the living room, past the cake on the counter, the strawberry cake, her favorite, that I'd been up since 5 making. I left the groceries, too. The eggs and the bread and the tangerines Margot liked to peel. I walked out the front door and I didn't close it behind me. Let her lock it herself for once. I got to my car, sat down, put my hands on the steering wheel, and for 40 minutes, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, engine off, windows up, staring at the dashboard while something enormous rearranged itself inside my chest. You know what the funny thing is, the really cruel, honest, funny thing? I wasn't shocked. That's what broke me more than the words themselves. I wasn't shocked. Some part of me, some deep, exhausted, truthful part that I'd been smothering for decades, had known that this was where we were heading, known that you can't pour yourself into another person for 34 years without becoming invisible, without becoming wallpaper, without becoming the thing they lean on so hard they forget you're alive underneath the weight. I drove home. I walked into my apartment. I set my purse on the kitchen table right next to the half-empty tube of frosting and the mixing bowl I hadn't washed yet. The apartment was quiet. It was always quiet. I lived alone. I had lived alone since Lila left for college 16 years ago, and in all that time, the loudest sound in my life had been the ringing of my phone when my daughter needed something. I sat on the edge of my bed and I looked at my hands. 67-year-old hands, nurse's hands, rough and capable and scarred in small ways from decades of IV lines and surgical tape and late-night emergencies in fluorescent-lit hallways. These hands had held Lila the moment she was born, had changed her diapers, wiped her tears, signed her permission slips, written her tuition checks. These hands had never once, not once, reached for anything for themselves first. And what had they gotten in return? A woman in a silk robe telling me she wished I would disappear. Something shifted in me that night. Not anger, not yet. Anger would come later, hot and clean and necessary. What I felt that night was something colder, something quieter. Recognition. The terrible, liberating recognition that I had done this to myself. Not all of it. Lila made her choices. Grant made his. But I had built the stage. I had written the script. I had taught everyone in my life, including myself, that Eleanor Shaw existed to serve, to rescue, to give until there was nothing left and then find a way to give more. I was the one who said yes when I should have said no. I was the one who paid bills I couldn't afford. I was the one who showed up uninvited because being needed was the only way I knew how to feel loved. I did that. Me. And that recognition, that horrible, honest gut punch of clarity, was the first real gift I'd given myself in 34 years. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed listening to the radiator click and the traffic hum outside my window, and I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not some movie moment where the music swells and the heroine stands up in the rain and declares she's done. No. It was quieter than that. Sadder. More real. I decided I was going to find out the truth. Not the emotional truth. I already knew that. My daughter didn't love me the way I loved her. Maybe she loved me, but not enough to pretend I mattered on my birthday. That truth I had swallowed whole, and it sat in my stomach like a stone. No. I wanted the financial truth. The real one. The one with numbers and dates and receipts. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, behind all the grief and the guilt and the self-blame, there was a voice, a small, furious, wide-awake voice saying, "Eleanor, you gave that girl everything, and it's time you knew exactly how much everything cost." The next morning, I got up at 5 like I always do. I made coffee. The cheap kind. The store brand, because I'd been buying the cheap kind for years, while my daughter drank $12 lattes from that artisan place downtown. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a box of files I kept in the hall closet. Tax returns, bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, emails, all of it. And I started counting. I started with the easy stuff. The down payment on the house. $42,000. That one I remembered because it was the biggest check I'd ever written in my life, and my hand shook when I signed it. Lila had been 28. She and Grant had just gotten married. A wedding I also paid for, by the way, but I'll get to that. They wanted the house on Wexford Lane. $350 was the asking price. They couldn't get approved for the full mortgage without a bigger down payment. Lila called me on a Tuesday night, crying. Always crying. That was her weapon of choice. Tears. Not screaming, not threatening, just that soft, shaking voice that made me feel like the worst mother in the world if I even hesitated. "Mom, we're going to lose the house. The seller has another offer. We need the down payment by Friday or it's gone. And the kids? I want my kids to grow up in a real house, Mom. With a yard. Like I had. Like she had. She grew up in a 2-bedroom rental with water stains on the ceiling and a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix the furnace. But sure, like she had. I transferred the money the next day, $42,000. Then the wedding. I added that up. The venue, the catering, the dress, the flowers, the photographer who charged more per hour than I made in a full shift at the hospital. $23,000. Grant's family contributed nothing. His mother sent a card with a $50 bill inside and a note that said, "Wishing you love and happiness." $50 for a $23,000 wedding. I still have that card somewhere. I keep it as evidence. Of what? I'm not sure. Imbalance? Maybe. Injustice. The kind of quiet, smiling injustice that happens in families every day and nobody talks about. Then came the smaller things. Except they weren't small. They just felt small at the time because they came one at a time, like drops of water, and I never noticed the bucket filling up. Leela's car broke down. $3,000 for repairs. Grant lost his job. $5,000 to cover bills while he figured things out. Margot was born, and the insurance didn't cover everything, so $4,000 for the hospital bills. Theo needed tutoring. $200 a month for 18 months. The roof leaked. $7,000. The kitchen renovation. $6,000. The credit card debt. $8,000. Then another $5,000. Then another $3,000. And every time, every single time, it was the same phone call, the same shaking voice, the same tears, the same script. "Mom, I don't know what we're going to do." And every time, the same answer. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." 4 words. 4 words that cost me everything. By noon that day, I had a number. Not exact. Some of the older records were incomplete, and there were cash amounts I couldn't trace, but close enough. Close enough to make me push my chair back from the table and stare at the wall for a very long time. $463,000. That's what I had given Lila and Grant over 14 years. Not counting groceries, not counting gas money, not counting the $100 bills I slipped into Lila's purse when she wasn't looking because I didn't want her to feel embarrassed. Not counting my time, my sleep, my health, my loneliness, my canceled plans, my missed opportunities. My entire life rearranged around the needs of a woman who told me yesterday that she wished I was dead. $463,000. From a retired nurse living in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky sink. I closed my laptop. I looked at the mixing bowl in the sink, the one I'd used to make the strawberry cake. And for the first time in I don't know how long, I felt something I didn't recognize at first. It was hard and hot, and it sat in the center of my chest like a coal. Anger. Not sadness, not guilt, not that weepy, apologetic, maybe I deserved it feeling I'd been carrying around for years like a second purse. No, this was anger, real anger, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that sits down, opens a file, and starts making plans. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Lila. For the first time in 34 years, when something big happened in my life, I didn't call my daughter. I called someone else. I called a lawyer. His name was Victor Hale. I'd never met him. I found him online, a family attorney with an office downtown, good reviews, reasonable rates. I called his office, and his receptionist picked up on the third ring. Hale Law Group, how can I help you? I need to speak with Mr. Hale. It's about a property matter and a family matter. They're the same thing, actually. She put me through. Victor Hale had a calm voice, not warm exactly, but steady, like a railing on a staircase. You could hold on to it and know it would hold your weight. Mrs. Shaw, tell me what's going on. And I did. I told him everything. The money, the house, the down payment, the years of rescue missions, the birthday, the words. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than he probably knew, because in my life, being listened to was rarer than being thanked. When I finished, there was a pause. Then he said something that changed the next 6 months of my life. Mrs. Shaw, you said you paid the down payment on the house. Do you have documentation? The check, the bank transfer, anything? I have the cashier's check receipt and the bank statement. And the title sheet. Do you know whose names are on the property title? I'm not sure. Lila handled all that. I just gave her the money. We need to find out. Because if your name is on that title, even partially, you have legal standing that changes everything. Legal standing. 2 words I had never associated with myself. I was a mother. Mothers don't have legal standing. Mothers have guilt and obligation and a phone that rings at midnight when someone else's life falls apart. But Victor Hale didn't see me as a mother. He saw me as a client, a person with rights, a woman who had invested nearly $500,000 into a property and a family that had just told her to vanish. I want to know where I stand, I said, legally, financially, all of it. Then let's start pulling records. I hung up. I sat in my kitchen. The coffee was cold. The mixing bowl was still in the sink. Outside my window, the October trees were dropping their leaves, letting go of what they couldn't carry anymore. And I thought, maybe it's my turn to let go too. But not quietly. Not this time. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. Something so small and so enormous that my hands trembled while I did it. I logged into my bank account, the joint emergency account I shared with Lila, the one I'd set up years ago just in case, the one with $11,000 in it, all of it mine. And I closed it. I transferred every dollar into my personal savings. I closed the joint access. I removed Lila's name, $11,000. My money. Every cent earned from overtime shifts and holiday pay and years of doing the work nobody else wanted to do. The night shifts, the weekend shifts, the shifts where I held strangers' hands while they died because their own families couldn't be bothered to show up. I closed the account and I sat there waiting to feel guilty, waiting for the wave of shame that always came when I did something for myself, waiting for that voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my own mother, to say, Eleanor, what kind of mother takes money from her child? But the voice didn't come, and the guilt didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Relief. I looked around my apartment, the small rooms, the secondhand furniture, the framed photo of Lila on the bookshelf. Age 7, gap-toothed smile, holding a dandelion she'd picked for me in the backyard of our old rental. That little girl, that sweet, laughing little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and press her cold feet against my legs and whisper, Mama, don't let the sky fall. I didn't know where that girl went. Maybe she grew up. Maybe she married the wrong man. Maybe I held on too tight. and she had to break free the only way she knew how, by breaking me. I don't know. What I knew was that the woman in the silk robe was not that girl anymore, and I could not keep setting myself on fire to keep her warm, not anymore. I washed the mixing bowl. I dried it. I put it back in the cabinet, and then I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote 2 words at the top of the page. My terms. I stared at those words for a long time. I had never written them before. I had never had terms. I had conditions. Conditions other people set for my love, my money, my time, my presence. But terms of my own? Rules I expected others to follow? Boundaries with consequences? Never. Not once in 67 years. I picked up the pen and I started writing, and I didn't stop for 2 hours. When I was done, I had 3 pages. 3 pages of terms. 3 pages of things I should have said years ago, decades ago, before the first check was written and the first tear was weaponized, and the first, "I don't know what we're going to do, Mom," was whispered into a phone at midnight. I folded the pages, put them in an envelope, wrote "For me" on the front, and I put the envelope in my nightstand drawer next to my reading glasses and a bottle of ibuprofen and a photograph of myself at 30, young and tired and holding a baby who would grow up to wish me dead. That was October 14th, the day I turned 67. The day my daughter told me to disappear. The day I started becoming visible for the first time in my life. 3 days went by before Lila noticed the account was closed. 3 days. $11,000 gone from her access. And it took her 72 hours to even check. That told me everything I needed to know about how much attention she paid to the money I put aside for her. It was furniture to her, background noise. Something that was always just there, like air or tap water, or a mother's love. You don't notice those things until they're missing. My phone rang on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my couch eating leftover soup, the kind I make in big batches on Sundays, lentil and whatever vegetables are about to go bad, because I learned a long time ago that wasting food is a luxury I can't afford. I'd been spending the past 3 days doing something I should have done years ago. Organizing. Not my apartment, my head, my files. My entire financial history with Lila and Grant going back to the day she turned 18 and I started writing checks. I couldn't afford to a girl who never learned the weight of a dollar because I made sure she never had to carry one. The phone rang and I looked at the screen and there was her name, Lila. And I want to tell you something that might sound strange. My hand didn't reach for it right away. For the first time in my life, I looked at my daughter's name on my phone and I hesitated. Not because I didn't love her, because I did. I loved her so much that answering that phone had become a reflex, like blinking or breathing or flinching before a blow. I picked up on the 5th ring. Mom. Not hi mom, not hey mom, just mom. 1 syllable. A summons. Hello, Lila. What happened to the account? Which account? You know which account. The emergency fund? I tried to transfer money and it's closed. What did you do? I set my soup down. I took a breath. And I said something I had been rehearsing in my bathroom mirror for 3 days, practicing the way you practice a speech before a job interview or a confrontation you know is going to get ugly. I closed it. Silence. Then, you what? I closed the account. I transferred the balance into my personal savings. You can't do that. I can. It was my money, Lila. Every dollar in that account came from me. My name was the primary holder. I closed it. But that was for emergencies. Your emergencies, not mine. I've never taken a cent out of that account. Not once. It sat there for 6 years as your safety net, funded entirely by me, and you're telling me I can't close my own account? Mom, we need that money. The mortgage is 2 months behind, I know. You told me on my birthday, right before you told me you wished I was dead. That landed. I heard it land. The sharp intake of breath on the other end. The half-second of silence that meant she was recalibrating, scrolling through her mental playbook for the next move. Tears? Guilt trip? Righteous anger? I had seen them all. I had fallen for them all. But something had changed in me over the past 3 days, something hard and clear like glass after you wipe the fog off a mirror. I could see the patterns now, the cycle, the script. She chose anger. I didn't say that. I didn't say I wished you were dead. You're twisting my words. You said your life would be easier if I wasn't around anymore, if I was just gone. That's not the same thing, isn't it? I was frustrated, Mom. You show up uninvited, you bring your groceries like we can't feed ourselves, you interrogate me about money. What am I supposed to? You're supposed to say thank you. Once, just once, Lila. In 34 years, just once. She went quiet. And in that quiet, I could hear everything she wasn't saying. I could hear Grant in the background. The TV was on, some sports channel, his usual backdrop. I could hear the house I paid for creaking around her. I could hear the weight of our entire history pressing down on the phone line like water behind a dam. I need that money back, Mom. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, no. The money is mine. I earned it. I saved it. And I'm keeping it. You're being selfish. I almost laughed. Almost. The woman who gave $463,000 to her ungrateful daughter over 14 years was being called selfish because she closed her own bank account. If someone had written this in a novel, I would have said the author was being heavy-handed, too on the nose. Nobody's that blind. Nobody's that entitled. But Lila was, because I made her that way. I have to go, Lila. Mom, you can't just... Good night. I hung up. And I sat there in my quiet apartment with my cold soup and my racing heart, and I waited for the guilt to crush me. I waited for that familiar avalanche, the self-doubt, the second-guessing, the what if I'm wrong, the maybe I'm being too hard on her. I waited for it the way you wait for a migraine you can feel building behind your eyes. It came. Of course it came. I'm not a machine. I'm a 67-year-old woman who spent her entire adult life believing that good mothers sacrifice everything and ask for nothing. You don't undo that programming in 3 days. You don't dismantle decades of conditioning with one phone call and a closed bank account. The guilt came, and it sat on my chest like a cinder block, and it whispered all the old familiar things. You're abandoning her. You're punishing her. You're a bad mother. You're going to lose her forever. But underneath the guilt, there was something else, something new, something I'd felt for the first time in that kitchen on October 14th, standing over the mixing bowl with frosting on my fingers and rage in my blood. Clarity. I was not a bad mother. I was a mother who had been too good for too long to people who never earned it. The next morning, I went to see Victor Hale. His office was on the 6th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. The receptionist, a young woman named Maria who had kind eyes and a nameplate made of brass, led me to a conference room with a long table and no windows. Victor was already there, waiting. Mrs. Shaw, have a seat. I sat. I'd brought the box. The whole box. The files, the statements, the receipts, the canceled checks, the emails, everything. I set it on the table between us, and it landed with a thud that felt significant. This was not a box. This was a biography. 34 years of sacrifice compressed into paper and ink and dollar signs. I did the math, I said. You want to know how much I've given my daughter? Tell me. $463,000, give or take. Victor looked at the box, then at me. He didn't blink. He didn't whistle or shake his head or make some dramatic face. He just nodded, slow and steady, and pulled the box toward him. Walk me through it, he said. So I did. I walked him through every cent, the down payment, the wedding, the car repairs, the medical bills, the tuition for Lila's business certificate she never used, the security deposit on the apartment before the house, the furniture, the appliances, the Christmas gifts I couldn't afford, the birthday gifts I couldn't afford, the surprise checks I slipped into her purse because she looked tired and I thought money might fix whatever was making her tired. It never did. It never once did. Victor took notes. He didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt. And when I got to the part about the $8,000 in April, the mortgage money that went to credit cards and Grant's truck, and who knows what else, he put his pen down. Mrs. Shaw, you mentioned the down payment on the house. $42,000. Do you remember the closing? Were you present? Yes. I drove Lila to the title office. I remember because she was pregnant with Theo, and she couldn't find parking, and she was panicking about the paperwork. And the title. When the documents were signed, do you recall whose names were on the deed? I frowned. Lila and Grant. It's their house. But you paid the down payment. Yes. And was there any documentation, anything at all, that acknowledged your contribution? A promissory note, a cosigner agreement, anything? I don't think so. It was family. You don't ask your daughter to sign a contract when you're helping her buy a home. Victor looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Actually, you should, but that's a conversation for another day. Let me look into the title records. I want to see exactly what's on that deed." He asked me more questions about the mortgage, about Grant's employment history, about whether Lila and Grant had any other debts I didn't know about whether I'd ever received any repayment, any at all, on the money I'd given them. The answer to that last question was easy and painful. No, not a dollar, not a cent, not even a gesture, not even one of those performative, "we'll pay you back someday," Mom, promises that families sometimes make to preserve the fiction that they're borrowing instead of taking. They just took. Year after year, they just took. I left Victor's office feeling something I hadn't expected. Tired. Not the physical tired I used to feel after a double shift at the hospital, when my feet ached and my back screamed and I could barely drive home without falling asleep at a red light. This was a different tired. A soul tired. The exhaustion of finally facing the full picture of what you've done to yourself and seeing it clearly, without the soft filter of, "but she's my daughter," or, "but that's what mothers do." I went home. I made tea. I sat in my chair by the window. The one I bought at a yard sale for $30 because the cushion was worn and nobody else wanted it, and I called my friend Doris. Doris was 71. We'd worked together at the hospital for 22 years. She was the only person in my life who had ever looked me in the eye and said, "Eleanor, you give too much." Not as a compliment, as a diagnosis. "Doris, I need to tell you something." "Tell me." I closed the emergency account, the one I had with Lila. "Good." "Good? That's it? What do you want me to say? That you shouldn't have? Eleanor, I've been watching you bleed for that girl for 30 years. The only surprise is that it took you this long." She called me selfish. Doris laughed. Not a mean laugh. A tired laugh. The laugh of a woman who has watched her best friend walk into the same wall over and over and over and finally sees her turning around. "Selfish," Doris repeated. "The woman who worked Christmas Day every year so she could give her daughter the holiday bonus. Selfish. The woman who ate store-brand cereal so her kid could wear name-brand shoes. Selfish. Eleanor, if you're selfish, then I'm a supermodel." I laughed. For the first time in days, I actually laughed. It came out ragged and wet, and it surprised me, like finding a flower growing through a crack in a sidewalk. It shouldn't have been there, but there it was. What do I do, Doris? You do what you're doing. You stop. You protect yourself. And you let that girl figure out what the world looks like when Mama isn't standing between her and the consequences. I thought about that word. Consequences. Lila had never faced a consequence in her life. Not a real one. Every time a consequence came knocking, a bill, a debt, a broken car, a failing marriage, a missed payment, I was there with my checkbook and my tired smile, absorbing the blow so she wouldn't have to feel it. I was a human shield, a walking, breathing, bank account draining human shield. And shields don't have birthdays, shields don't have feelings, shields don't get thanked. Victor called me 4 days later. I was at the grocery store standing in the canned soup aisle, comparing prices on chicken noodle because I had become the kind of person who counts pennies on soup while my daughter's kitchen had a $6,000 countertop. My phone buzzed and I stepped to the side, between the soups and the canned vegetables, and I answered. "Mrs. Shaw, I have news." "Good or bad?" "Interesting, very interesting." I pulled the title records on the Wexford Lane property. "And?" "Your name is on the deed." I leaned against the shelf. A can of cream of mushroom wobbled but didn't fall. "What?" "Your name is on the deed. Eleanor Marie Shaw. You're listed as a co-owner." "That's not... I didn't know that. How is that possible?" "My guess? When the property was purchased, someone at the title company added you because you were the source of the down payment. It's not uncommon. The mortgage is in Lila and Grant's names, but the deed, the ownership document, includes you. You own a legal interest in that house." I stood in the soup aisle of a grocery store and the fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and the muzak played something soft and forgettable, and the world tilted, just slightly, just enough. I owned part of the house I paid for, the house I was told to leave, the house where my daughter sat in her silk robe and wished me gone. I owned it. What does that mean? I asked. Practically, what does it change? It changes everything. As a co-owner, you have legal rights to the property. You can request a sale, you can demand a buyout, you can block certain decisions about the property, refinancing, for example, or taking out a second mortgage. Which, by the way, what? They took out a second mortgage 18 months ago, without your knowledge or consent. $65,000. The can of cream of mushroom fell. I didn't pick it up. $65,000? Against the property, which means against your equity, too. They forged the paperwork, Mrs. Shaw, or someone at the bank didn't check the title properly. Either way, that loan was taken without the consent of all owners, which is you. I couldn't speak. $65,000. A second mortgage I didn't know about, taken against a house I didn't know I owned, by people who told me I was too involved. Too involved. That was the phrase Grant used. Too involved. While he was borrowing $65,000 against my property behind my back. Mrs. Shaw, are you still there? I'm in the soup aisle, I said, which didn't make any sense as a response. But Victor, to his credit, didn't press. I think we need to meet soon. There are options here, and you need to understand them before things escalate. Things are going to escalate? Mrs. Shaw, the mortgage is 2 months behind. The second mortgage payments are being made, but barely, and they just lost access to your emergency fund. Things are going to escalate whether we're ready or not. I drove home from the grocery store with shaking hands. I forgot to buy the soup. I forgot to buy anything. I just walked out, past the checkout lanes, past the woman at the self-service register who smiled at me because she didn't know that the old lady in the navy blouse was walking out of a grocery store and into a legal battle she never asked for and wasn't sure she could survive. I sat in my apartment that night and I opened the envelope from my nightstand, the one that said, "For me," on the front. I read my terms. 3 pages of things I should have said years ago. And I added a new one, at the bottom, in handwriting that shook but didn't hesitate. I will not be stolen from in silence. Victor and I met 2 days later. He had everything spread out on the conference table. The title records, the mortgage documents, the second mortgage paperwork, bank records he'd obtained through legal channels. It was all there. The whole mess laid out under fluorescent lights like a patient on an operating table. And I was the surgeon who had to decide how deep to cut. You have 3 options, Victor said. He was organized. I appreciated that. After 34 years of chaos management, I craved structure the way some people crave sugar. Option 1, you do nothing. You leave your name on the title, you accept the situation as it is, and you hope Lila and Grant eventually catch up on the mortgage and the second loan. Given their financial history, I'll be honest, I don't recommend this. They're not catching up. They're falling behind. Option 2? Option 2. You formally demand a buyout. You send a letter, through me, stating your legal ownership and giving them a time frame to purchase your share of the property at fair market value. If they can't afford it, which they can't, you move to option 3. Which is? Partition sale. You petition the court to force a sale of the property. Both parties receive their share of the proceeds after the mortgages and liens are satisfied. I looked at the table, at the papers, at the numbers, at the evidence of everything I'd given and everything that had been taken without my knowledge or consent. If we force a sale, I said, Lila loses the house. Yes. And the kids, Theo and Margot, they lose their home. Victor paused. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something soften behind his professional composure. He was a lawyer, not a robot. He could see what this was costing me. Mrs. Shaw, I understand this is difficult, but I want you to hear something clearly. You are not the one who put this family in jeopardy. You are the one who kept them afloat for 14 years. The second mortgage, that was taken without your consent. The missed payments, those are their choices. The financial mismanagement that predates your involvement and it continued throughout it. You didn't cause this. You delayed it. You delayed it. Those 3 words hit me like cold water. Because he was right. That's exactly what I'd done. For 14 years, I hadn't solved Lila's problems. I'd postponed them. I'd thrown money at a house that was sinking and convinced myself I was building something when all I was really doing was buying time. Time for Lila to grow up. Time for Grant to get his act together. Time for someone, anyone, to learn how to stand without me holding them upright. But nobody learned. Because why would they? The safety net was always there. I was always there. Send the letter, I said. Which option? Start with 2. Give them the chance to buy me out. Set a timeline, 60 days. Victor nodded. And if they can't? Then we move to 3. I said it calmly. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. And somewhere inside me, in a place I was only beginning to discover existed, something unclenched. A fist I'd been making for decades, held so tight for so long that I'd forgotten what open felt like. I drove home and I poured myself a glass of wine. The cheap kind. The kind that comes in a bottle with a screw cap instead of a cork, because I never learned to buy nice things for myself. I sat by my window and I watched the sun go down over the buildings across the street, and I thought about Theo and Margot. This was the part that gutted me. Not Lila, not Grant, the children. Those 2 beautiful, innocent, gap-toothed, clumsy, laughing, tangerine-peeling children who had no idea that the adults in their lives had made such a spectacular mess of everything. Theo, who loved dinosaurs and asked me questions about bones every time I visited. Margot, who called me Nana Ellie and held my hand when we crossed the street even though she was old enough to cross by herself. If the house was sold, they would lose their home, their rooms, their yard. The tree in the back that Theo tried to climb last summer and fell out of and came to me with a scraped knee, and I cleaned it and bandaged it and told him he was brave, and he looked up at me with those big eyes and said, "Nana, you're the best doctor in the whole world." I drank my cheap wine and I cried for the first time since the birthday. Not for Lila, not for myself, for them. For the fact that the adults had failed so completely that the children were going to pay the price. For the fact that I couldn't fix this one. That fixing it, writing another check, absorbing another blow, being the shield again, would only make it worse. Would only teach Lila and Grant that there are no consequences, ever, for anything, because Eleanor will always be there to catch the pieces. I couldn't be the shield anymore. Even for them. Even for Theo and Margot. Because the shield was breaking. The shield was 67 years old and tired and broke, and standing in a 1-bedroom apartment drinking $5 wine and crying into a paper towel because she couldn't afford tissues. The letter went out on a Monday. Victor sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. Professional, formal. The kind of letter that arrives in a business envelope and you know before you open it that your day is about to change. I know exactly when Lila received it because my phone exploded at 4:17 p.m. on Wednesday. Not a call, a barrage. 12 text messages in 8 minutes, each one more unhinged than the last. What is this? Mom, are you serious right now? You're suing us? Grant is losing his mind. How could you do this to your own daughter? You're going to take our house away. The kids, Mom, think about the kids. This is insane. You need help. Everyone is going to know what you did. I'm calling Aunt Ruth. You are dead to me. Do not contact me or my children. I read them. All 12. I read them sitting at my kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface and my heart hammering and my throat so tight I could barely swallow. I read them and I felt each one like a needle. Quick, sharp, precise. She knew where to aim. She always knew where to aim. The children, the family reputation, the threat of total severance. These were her weapons, honed over 34 years of watching me fold every time she deployed them. But here's the thing about weapons. They only work if the target cooperates. If the target stands still. If the target believes she deserves to be hit. I didn't respond. Not to any of them. I put my phone face down on the table and I went to the kitchen and I washed the dishes and I dried them and I put them away. And then I sat back down and I called Victor. She got the letter. I gathered. My office received 3 voicemails in the last hour, 1 from Lila, 2 from Grant. What did they say? Lila cried. Grant threatened to sue me personally, which is not how any of this works. Then he called back and asked if there was a way to settle this quietly. Is there? That depends on whether they can come up with the money, which we both know they can't. I looked at the 12 text messages still glowing on my phone screen. The last one. The one that was supposed to be the kill shot. You are dead to me. 3 weeks ago, that sentence would have destroyed me. 3 weeks ago, I would have driven to Wexford Lane in the middle of the night and slid a check under the door with a note that said, "I'm sorry," even though I had nothing to apologize for. 3 weeks ago, I was still the woman who believed that being a good mother meant being a willing victim. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't know exactly who I was becoming, but I knew who I was leaving behind. The doormat, the ATM, the emotional punching bag wrapped in a navy blouse with pearl buttons. Victor and I set the 60-day clock. Lila and Grant had until mid-December to either buy out my share of the property at fair market value, which, given the current market and the equity position, Victor estimated at somewhere around $120,000, or agree to a voluntary sale. If neither happened, we would file for partition. I didn't hear from Lila for 2 weeks after the text messages. 2 weeks of silence so loud it rang in my ears. No calls, no texts, no visits, no FaceTime with the grandchildren, which was the cruelest part, the most surgical cut. She knew exactly what she was doing when she took them away. Theo and Margot were collateral, hostages. Bargaining chips in a negotiation where the only currency was my pain. But I held. I held because Doris called me every day and told me to hold. I held because Victor sent me weekly updates and reminded me that I was within my legal rights. I held because every night before I went to sleep, I opened my nightstand drawer and looked at the envelope that said, "For me." And I read my terms, and I remembered that I was not the villain in this story. I was the one who had been paying for the whole thing. Then, in the 3rd week, something happened that I didn't expect. My phone rang and the screen said, "Grant Monroe." Not Lila. Grant! In 14 years of knowing this man, he had called me exactly twice. Once to ask if I could babysit. Once to ask if I could lend him $3,000 for something he described as a business opportunity that turned out to be an online poker account. I picked up. Eleanor. He never called me Mom. Never. I was always Eleanor, spoken the way you'd say the name of a neighbor whose dog kept getting into your yard. Grant, we need to talk about this house thing. Talk to my attorney. I don't want to talk to your attorney. I want to talk to you, person to person, family. Family. This man who looked at me over the top of his phone like I was furniture. This man who borrowed $3,000 from me for a poker account and never paid it back. This man who took out a $65,000 second mortgage on my property without telling me. Family. What do you want to say, Grant? I want to say that Lila's a mess. She hasn't slept in 2 weeks. She's not eating. The kids are asking where Nana is and she doesn't know what to tell them. This is tearing her apart. And you think that's my fault? I think you could fix this. You could call off the lawyer and we could work something out. Between us. Like normal people. Normal people don't take out secret mortgages on property they don't fully own, Grant. Silence. A long one. I could hear him breathing. I could hear him deciding how to play this, charm or pressure. He chose pressure. Eleanor, if you force this sale, we're going to lose the house. The kids are going to lose their home. And everyone, your friends, the family, everyone, is going to know that you did this, that you chose money over your grandchildren. There it was. The same weapon. The same bullet. The children. Always the children. Use the children like a shield, like a bargaining chip, like a grenade you lob into the conversation and dare the other person to hold. Grant, let me ask you something. When you took out the second mortgage, the $65,000, did you think about the kids then? Did you think about what would happen if you couldn't make the payments? Did you consider, even for a moment, that you were gambling with their stability? Nothing. And when Lila spent the $8,000 I gave her for the mortgage on credit card bills and your truck repairs, did either of you think about the kids then? That's different. How? Because we were trying to survive, Eleanor. We were drowning and we did what we had to do. You've been drowning for 14 years, Grant. And I've been the oxygen. And instead of learning to swim, you just kept breathing harder. He hung up. No goodbye. No argument. Just the dead air of a disconnected call and the faint echo of a man who was used to getting what he wanted from the old woman with the checkbook, but just discovered the checkbook was closed. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking. My chest was tight. I could feel the old Eleanor tugging at me. The Eleanor who would have caved, who would have called back and apologized, who would have found some way to make this all okay for everyone except herself. She was still in there, that woman. She was still alive. She was just no longer in charge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about something Doris had said to me years ago, back when we were both still working at the hospital. We were on a night shift, sitting in the break room at 2 a.m., drinking vending machine coffee that tasted like regret. And Doris looked at me over her styrofoam cup and said, "Eleanor, do you know what the hardest part of nursing is? It's not the dying patients. It's not the blood. It's learning that you can't save everyone. And the ones you can't save, sometimes they're the ones you love the most." I thought she was talking about patience. But lying in my bed that night, 20 years later, staring at a ceiling with a water stain shaped like Florida, I understood. She wasn't talking about patience at all. December came. The 60 days were almost up. Victor called me on a Tuesday. "They haven't responded, Mrs. Shaw. No buyout offer. No counter-proposal. Nothing." Nothing? Their attorney, they hired one last week, a man named Barlow, not great, frankly, sent a letter calling our claim frivolous and accusing you of elder manipulation of property records, which is absurd. But he's stalling. What do? We file. We proceed with the partition action. The court will order the property sold, the proceeds divided according to ownership interests, and any outstanding liens, including that second mortgage, will be settled from the sale. I closed my eyes. The house on Wexford Lane, the one with the yard Theo tried to climb trees in, and the sunroom I paid $6,000 toward. The house where my daughter told me to disappear. "File it," I said, and Victor filed it. And somewhere across town, in a house that was already slipping away from them, Lila and Grant received another envelope. And this time, it wasn't a letter. It was a summons. I stood at my kitchen window that evening, the same window where I'd watched so many sunsets and cried so many tears and made so many phone calls that started with, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'll take care of it." The street below was quiet. The radiator clicked. The apartment smelled like the lentil soup I'd made on Sunday, still good, still lasting. And I realized something that made my knees weak and my eyes burn. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing Lila, not of being called selfish or cruel or heartless, not of the looks I might get from relatives who would hear Lila's version of the story and judge me without ever asking for mine. Not of any of it. Because the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. My daughter told me she wished I was gone. She stole from me in silence. She used my grandchildren as weapons. She took my love and my money and my years and my health and gave me nothing back but contempt disguised as familiarity. The worst had already happened. Everything else was just paperwork. I turned off the kitchen light. I washed my mug. I went to bed. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. The summons landed on Lila's doorstep on a Thursday, and by Friday morning, I had become the villain of every conversation in my family. I know this because my phone started ringing from numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Aunt Ruth, my late husband's sister, a woman who sent me a Christmas card every December with no return address and hadn't visited once since Lila's wedding, called me at 7 in the morning while I was brushing my teeth. I answered because when you're 67 and a number you don't recognize calls at 7 a.m., you think someone died. "Eleanor, it's Ruth." "Ruth, it's been a while. Lila called me last night. She was hysterical. She said you're trying to take her house." I spit toothpaste into the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bags under my eyes, the lines, the gray roots coming in because I hadn't had time or money for the salon in 3 months. This face, this tired, giving, used-up face. And now I was explaining myself to a woman who hadn't called me in 4 years. "Ruth, do you know how much money I've given Lila over the past 14 years? That's not the point, Eleanor. She's your daughter. The point is $463,000, and a second mortgage taken against my property without my knowledge. $65,000. Silence. Then, well, I'm sure there's an explanation for that. There is. The explanation is that my daughter and her husband stole from me, and now that I'm asking for accountability, I'm the bad guy. Nobody's calling you the bad guy. We're just worried about the children. The children. Again. Always the children. The human shields, the conversation enders. Invoke the grandchildren and watch Eleanor crumble. It was a family tradition at this point. I'm worried about the children too, Ruth. I'm worried that they're growing up in a house where the adults don't pay bills, don't tell the truth, and treat their grandmother like a walking bank account. I'm worried about what they're learning, Ruth sighed. That same sigh Lila did, the one that means you've become inconvenient. I just think you should consider what this looks like. What does it look like, Ruth? It looks like a mother punishing her daughter. And what does it look like when a daughter tells her mother she wishes she was dead? Ruth didn't have an answer for that. She mumbled something about family and forgiveness, and wouldn't it be nice if everyone just sat down and talked? And I said goodbye and hung up and rinsed my toothbrush and thought, this is how it works. This is how the machine operates. The person who finally says enough becomes the villain. The people who spent years taking and lying and manipulating, they become the victims. Because stopping is louder than stealing. Because a boundary looks like aggression to someone who's been living off your silence. Over the next week, I got 4 more calls. Lila's friend Jenna, who I'd met once at a barbecue, and who apparently knew enough about my life to have an opinion. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since a funeral in 2019. A woman from Lila's old book club, her book club calling me, who said she was just checking in but was clearly fishing for details she could report back. And Grant's mother, Barbara, who left a voicemail I listened to twice because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Eleanor, this is Barbara Monroe. I want you to know that what you're doing to Grant and Lila is unconscionable. These are good people who are struggling, and you're making it worse. I raised my son to be a provider, and he doesn't need you hovering over his family with your ledger of complaints. Call off your lawyer. Be a mother, not an accountant. Be a mother, not an accountant. From a woman whose total contribution to her son's household was a $50 bill and a greeting card. From a woman who never once offered to help with the mortgage, the medical bills, the car repairs, the school costs, the groceries, the emergencies, any of it. She sat in her condo in Florida drinking iced tea and sending greeting cards while I hemorrhaged money to keep her son's family afloat, and now she was lecturing me about motherhood. I didn't call her back. I called Victor instead. They're building a narrative, I said. Lila's telling everyone I'm the monster. That's expected. People who are cornered often try to control the story. But stories don't hold up in court, Mrs. Shaw. Documents do. And we have the documents. He was right. We did. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every canceled check, the title records with my name in black ink, the second mortgage paperwork that nobody asked me to sign because nobody told me it existed. We had the truth in a box, organized and labeled, sitting on Victor Hale's conference table. But the truth doesn't stop the phone from ringing. And the truth doesn't stop you from lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering if your family is right, if you are the monster, if drawing a line makes you cruel. I want to tell you about one specific night because it matters. It was a Wednesday in late November. The partition filing was moving forward. Lila hadn't spoken to me in 3 weeks. Not since the text messages, the last one being, "You are dead to me." I hadn't seen Theo or Margot. I hadn't heard their voices. I didn't know if they were asking about me, if Lila had told them something awful about their Nana, if they thought I had abandoned them. That not knowing was worse than anything Lila had said to me. The words I could survive. The silence from those children was something else entirely. I was sitting in my kitchen at 11 p.m., drinking tea that had gone cold an hour ago, and I was looking at my phone. Not at messages. At photos. I had an album, hundreds of pictures of Theo and Margot. Margot at her dance recital, tutu crooked, grinning so hard her eyes disappeared. Theo holding up a spelling test with a gold star, holding it like it was an Olympic medal. The two of them on my couch on Christmas morning, surrounded by wrapping paper, eating the cinnamon rolls I always made because store-bought ones aren't the same and anyone who says they are is lying. I scrolled through those pictures and I felt myself starting to crack. Not the clean crack from my birthday. The one that woke me up. This was a messier crack. A weaker one. The kind that makes you reach for your phone and dial the number and say the words you know you shouldn't say. "I'm sorry, I'll stop, I'll give you whatever you want. Just let me see the children." I picked up my phone. I opened Lila's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. One tap. One tap, and I could end all of this. Go back to being the Eleanor everyone needed me to be. The quiet, giving, self-erasing Eleanor who never asked for anything and accepted everything and kept the peace by keeping herself small. One tap. I put the phone down. I put it face down on the table and I walked to my bedroom and I opened the nightstand drawer and I took out the envelope that said, "For me." And I read my terms. 3 pages. My handwriting. My voice. My conditions for my own survival. And at the bottom, the line I'd added after Victor told me about the second mortgage. I will not be stolen from in silence. I closed the envelope. I went back to the kitchen. I poured the cold tea down the sink. I washed the mug. And I did not call my daughter. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than the double shifts. Harder than raising Lila alone. Harder than writing the $42,000 check. Not calling, not caving, not reaching across the silence and offering myself up to be used one more time. That was the fight. Not the legal battle, not the paperwork. The real fight was inside me. The war between the woman I'd been and the woman I was trying to become. December arrived like a fist. Cold and gray and relentless. Victor filed the partition action and the court set a hearing date for January. Lila and Grant's attorney, Barlow, the one Victor called not great, filed a response claiming that my contribution to the down payment was a gift and that I had no legitimate ownership claim to the property. A gift. $463,000 over 14 years, and they called it a gift. Like I was some wealthy philanthropist handing out grants from a bottomless fund. Not a retired nurse eating store-brand cereal in a one-bedroom apartment. Victor wasn't worried. Their argument doesn't hold, he said during our meeting the first week of December. Maria brought us coffee. Real coffee, not the vending machine kind. And I sat across from him while he walked me through the legal landscape like a doctor explaining an X-ray. The title is clear, your name is on the deed. That's not a gift notation. That's ownership. Barlow can argue intent all he wants, but the document says what it says. And the second mortgage, they're going to have a very hard time explaining how they obtained a $65,000 loan against a property without the consent of all titled owners. What if they say I knew about it? Did you? No. Then they'd have to prove you did. And they can't because you didn't sign anything. The loan officer either didn't check the title properly or someone misrepresented the ownership. Either way, it's a problem. But it's their problem, not yours. I nodded. But something was bothering me, something that had been sitting in the back of my mind like a low-grade fever, present but unnameable. Victor, what happens to the children during all this? He set down his pen. Legally, the children aren't party to the property action. They're minors. Their housing is their parents' responsibility. I know what the law says. I'm asking what happens in reality. When the house sells. When they have to move. When 2 kids who don't understand any of this get uprooted because the adults in their lives couldn't manage money or tell the truth. That's not something I can answer, Mrs. Shaw. I know. I'm not asking you to answer it. I'm asking you to let me sit with it for a moment. We sat. The clock on the wall ticked. Maria's voice drifted in from the reception area, answering a phone call about a different case, a different family, a different box of pain sitting on a different conference table. I'm not doing this to hurt them, I said. I need you to know that. I need someone to know that. I know. I'm doing this because if I don't, if I walk away and let them keep taking, there won't be anything left. Not for them, not for me. I'll be 80 years old in a state-funded nursing home because I spent my retirement keeping my daughter in a house she couldn't afford, and she still won't visit. She still won't say thank you. She'll still wish I was gone, because by then, I'll have nothing left to give, and that's the only version of me she values. Victor was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's the clearest reason I've heard from any client in 20 years of practice." I left his office that day and I did something impulsive, something I hadn't planned. I drove to a travel agency, a real one, the kind with posters in the window and a bell that rings when you open the door. I hadn't booked a trip in over a decade. Every vacation day I'd ever had went to Lila. Every spare dollar, every free weekend, babysitting, hospital visits, emergency drives across town at midnight because Grant was at a bar and Lila was scared and the kids were crying, and who else was she going to call? But that day, standing in a travel agency that smelled like printer ink and carpet shampoo, I looked at a poster on the wall. A lake. Mountains. Green water reflecting white peaks. A small city on the shore with pastel buildings and church steeples and boats bobbing in a harbor. "Where's that?" I asked the woman behind the desk. "Hallstatt. It's in Austria. The Alps." "Is it quiet?" She smiled. "Very." "Book it." She looked surprised. I must not have looked like the type. A 67-year-old woman in a discount store blouse, buying a plane ticket to the Austrian Alps by herself. But she didn't ask questions. She booked it. 2 weeks. A small hotel near the lake. Departure. December 22nd. I was going to spend Christmas alone in a country where nobody knew my name. And for the first time in 34 years, that sounded like a gift I actually wanted. I told Victor. He approved. "The legal process will continue while you're gone. Nothing requires your physical presence until the January hearing. Go. Clear your head." I told Doris. She cried. "I'm so proud of you, Eleanor. You're finally doing something for yourself, and it's not a guilt trip or a grocery run or a bailout. It's just for you." I didn't tell Lila. She didn't need to know. She had told me I was dead to her. Dead people don't send travel updates. The week before I left, I packed a suitcase. One suitcase, because I didn't own much worth taking. And I sat in my apartment and I looked around at the life I'd built. The small rooms, the secondhand furniture, the framed photographs, the kitchen where I'd made 1,000 meals for one person, the living room where I'd sat alone on 100 Friday nights while Lila went to dinner parties in the house I paid for. This apartment, this tiny, quiet, lonely apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine, really mine. Not cosign, not mortgage, not financed through guilt or obligation or a crying phone call at midnight. Just a small space where a small woman lived a small life and tried very hard to pretend that giving everything away had made her full instead of empty. I locked the door. I drove to the airport. I boarded a plane, and as the wheels left the ground, I felt something lift off me. Not everything, not all of it, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to close my eyes and not see Lila's face or hear Grant's voice or feel the 12 text messages burning in my pocket like hot coals. Enough to let go. Not of love. Never of love. But of the performance of love. The exhausting, bankrupting, soul-crushing performance of proving that I deserve to exist by emptying myself into someone else. The plane climbed. The clouds swallowed the city below. And somewhere down there, in a house on Wexford Lane, a family was about to face a Christmas without Nana Ellie for the first time. No cinnamon rolls, no stockings stuffed with tangerines and small gifts wrapped in tissue paper. No grandmother in the kitchen making everything okay while nobody noticed she was falling apart. They were going to have to make their own Christmas, their own cinnamon rolls, their own okay. And maybe, that was the most loving thing I had ever done. Hallstatt was cold and quiet and beautiful in the way that only places untouched by your own history can be beautiful. The lake was dark green, almost black in the mornings before the sun cleared the peaks. The mountains stood around it like old, patient things that had seen centuries of human nonsense and decided not to comment. Snow dusted the rooftops. Cobblestone streets wound between buildings painted yellow and pink and white, and the air smelled like pine and cold water and wood smoke. My hotel was small, a family-run place with heavy wooden furniture and windows that looked out over the lake. The woman who checked me in, Helga, sturdy and kind, with a face that looked like it had been smiling for 60 years straight, handed me a room key and a cup of something hot that tasted like cinnamon and apples. "You are here alone?" she asked. Not judgmental, just curious. "Yes." "Good. Sometimes alone is the best company." I carried my suitcase to my room. It was clean and simple. A bed with a white quilt, a wooden desk, a window. Nothing extra. Nothing trying to impress me. Just a room that existed for the purpose of holding one person safely, and that was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and I cried. Not the messy, drowning, can't breathe kind of crying I'd done in November. A different kind. The kind that comes when you've been holding yourself together so tightly for so long that the simple act of sitting in a quiet room where nobody wants anything from you is enough to crack the dam. I cried because the room was warm and the quilt was clean, and nobody was going to call me at midnight asking for money. I cried because I was in another country, on another continent, surrounded by mountains that didn't know my name, and for the first time in decades, that anonymity felt like safety instead of loneliness. I stayed in Hallstatt for 13 days. I didn't call anyone except Doris, twice, and Victor, once. I didn't check Lila's social media. I didn't compose long letters I'd never send. I didn't rehearse arguments in the shower or tally up grievances while eating breakfast. I did something I hadn't done since before Lila was born. I existed without purpose. And let me tell you, that was terrifying. Because when you've spent your entire adult life defining yourself by what you give to other people, the absence of that giving feels like death. The first few days, I didn't know what to do with myself. I walked along the lake. I ate. I sat in the hotel lobby reading a book I barely absorbed. I watched other tourists, families, couples, groups of friends laughing and taking photos, and I felt a distance from them that was almost physical. Like I was watching life through a window I couldn't open. But slowly, not smoothly, not in some beautiful cinematic montage, things shifted. On the fourth day, I walked to a small cafe at the end of the main street and ordered a coffee and a pastry I couldn't pronounce. The woman at the next table was about my age, German, traveling alone. Her name was Ingrid. She had white hair cropped short and reading glasses on a chain, and she was doing a crossword puzzle in a language I didn't understand. She looked up. American? Is it that obvious? She smiled. Your shoes. I looked down at my shoes, the same comfortable walking shoes I'd worn at the hospital for years. Sensible. Ugly. The shoes of a woman who prioritized function over form because she never had time or money for vanity. I'm Eleanor. Ingrid, sit with me. I've been talking to myself for 3 days and I'm starting to answer. I sat, and we talked. Not about anything heavy, not about daughters or lawsuits or $463,000. We talked about the weather, the lake, the pastry, which was too sweet, but we ate it anyway. She told me about her late husband, a mathematician who loved opera and couldn't cook. I told her about nursing, about the night shifts, about the strange intimacy of holding a stranger's hand at 3 a.m. while a machine beeped and a life ended and you had to go home afterward and pretend you hadn't just watched someone die. It was the most normal conversation I'd had in months. No one asked me for money. No one sighed at me. No one told me I was too involved or not involved enough, or selfish or smothering. I was just a woman at a table, talking to another woman at a table, drinking coffee that was too strong and eating pastry that was too sweet. And it was fine. It was better than fine. It was human. I went back to that cafe every morning. Ingrid was there most days. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat and read our separate books in companionable silence. One morning, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said something I've thought about every day since. Eleanor, you look like a woman who has just taken off a very heavy coat. I stared at her. What do you mean? You look lighter every day. When you arrived, you sat like this. She hunched her shoulders forward, curved her spine, made herself small. And now you sit like this. She straightened up, opened her shoulders, lifted her chin. Something is leaving you, something heavy. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window at the lake, at the mountains, at the quiet street where a man was sweeping snow off his front step like it was the most important task in the world. I think I've been carrying something for a very long time, I said, and I think I just set it down. Good. Don't pick it up again. I smiled. Ingrid went back to her crossword, and I sat there feeling something I couldn't name until later, lying in my bed that night under the white quilt, listening to the wind off the lake. The feeling was this. I was still here, despite everything, despite the birthday, despite the words, despite the texts, despite the phone calls from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years but suddenly had opinions about my choices, despite the legal battle and the silence from my grandchildren and the $65,000 betrayal and the $463,000 that had vanished into a life I wasn't allowed to be part of anymore. I was still here, and I was drinking coffee in Austria and eating 2 sweet pastries and talking to a German woman named Ingrid about nothing, and it was the best I'd felt in years. That's when I understood something about survival that I wish I'd learned decades ago. It doesn't look the way you expect. It doesn't look like winning or fighting or standing on a mountaintop with your fist in the air. Sometimes survival looks like a woman sitting in a cafe in a foreign country, eating a pastry by herself, not needing to be anywhere else, not needing to be needed, just being. Victor called me on December 30th. I was walking along the lake path, my breath clouding in the cold air, my hands shoved into the pockets of a coat I'd bought at a shop in town because I hadn't packed warm enough. The coat was dark green. It fit perfectly. I'd paid full price and hadn't felt guilty about it, which was a victory so small and so enormous that it made me laugh out loud in the coat shop while the saleswoman looked at me with polite confusion. "Mrs. Shaw, I have an update. Tell me." They missed the December mortgage payment. That's 3 months now. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. I stopped walking. The lake stretched out in front of me, still and dark and impossibly calm. A bird, I don't know what kind, something small and gray, landed on a rock near the shore and looked at me like I was interrupting its morning. "Foreclosure," I repeated. "Yes. With the partition action and the foreclosure, the house will almost certainly be sold. The question now is whether it goes through foreclosure auction, which typically yields less, or whether we can arrange a private sale through the court, which would maximize the return for all parties. Including me, including you. Your ownership stake is documented and protected. Whatever the sale price, your share will be calculated after the primary mortgage and the second mortgage are settled. Given the property value and the outstanding balances, you're looking at a recovery of somewhere between $80,000 and $140,000. I looked at the lake, at the mountains, at the bird on the rock. "Victor, am I doing the right thing?" He paused. In all our conversations, I had never asked him that. I had asked him what was legal, what was possible, what was smart, but never what was right. Because right is not a legal question. Right is a question you ask yourself at 3 a.m. when the lawyer's gone home and the documents are filed and you're standing alone on the edge of a lake in Austria, wondering if protecting yourself makes you a good person or just a person who got tired of being a bad one. "Mrs. Shaw, I'm your attorney, not your priest. But I'll tell you this. In 20 years, I've had hundreds of clients walk through my door after being taken advantage of by family members. Most of them wait too long. Most of them lose everything. You caught this in time, you have documentation, you have rights, and you have the courage to enforce them. Whether that's right, that's above my pay grade. But it's not wrong. Not wrong. I'd take that. I'd spent 67 years trying to be right. The right mother, the right nurse, the right person, and all it got me was a 1-bedroom apartment and a daughter who wished me dead. Not wrong was good enough. Not wrong was a foundation I could build on. I finished my walk. I went back to the hotel. I packed my suitcase. The same one suitcase, plus the green coat and a wooden ornament I'd bought at a Christmas market. A little carved bird painted blue. The first souvenir I'd purchased for myself in as long as I could remember. I checked out. Helga hugged me at the door, which surprised me because we barely knew each other, but she held me tight for 3 seconds and said, "Come back. The lake misses people like you." I flew home on January 2nd. The apartment was cold. I'd turned the heat down before I left to save money, another habit from a lifetime of self-denial. I turned it up. I unpacked. I put the bluebird on my windowsill where it could look out at the street and the bare trees and the gray sky that looked nothing like Austria but was mine. And then I opened my laptop and I checked my email, and I found a message from Victor, sent that morning, with a subject line that made my hands go still on the keyboard. It read, "Hearing date moved up, January 19th. Prepare to testify." I sat in my cold apartment looking at that email, and I felt the weight of everything settle back onto my shoulders. The trip was over. The lake was gone. Ingrid was gone. The cafe and the pastry and the quiet were gone. I was back in my life. The real one. The messy one. The one with a daughter who hated me and a house being foreclosed and a legal hearing in 17 days where I would have to sit in a room and explain to a judge why a mother would do this to her own child. And I would have to find the words. The real words. Not the legal ones. Victor would handle those. The human ones. The ones that explained how a woman could love her daughter with every fiber of her being and still say, "Enough. No more. I matter too. My money matters. My dignity matters. My life, what's left of it, matters." 17 days. That's what I had. I closed the laptop, I looked at the blue bird on the windowsill, and I started rehearsing. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and anxiety. I know that sounds like a strange detail to remember, but when you're about to walk into the most important room of your life, your brain latches onto the oddest things. The smell. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects. The scuff marks on the linoleum from thousands of shoes that had walked this same hallway carrying their own private disasters. I was just another pair of sensible shoes. Another file folder. Another family that couldn't figure out how to love each other without destroying each other. Victor was already there when I arrived. He was standing by the courtroom doors, briefcase in hand, tie straight, expression calm in the way that lawyers are calm, professionally, not personally. He'd seen this 100 times. For him, this was Tuesday. For me, this was the day I would sit across a room from my daughter and explain to a stranger in a black robe why I deserved to exist as more than a funding source. "How are you?" he asked. "Terrible." "You?" "Prepared." Which is better than terrible. I almost smiled. Almost. Then the doors opened and the bailiff called the case number and my legs went heavy. Not numb. Heavy. Like each step toward that courtroom was pulling against a tide of 34 years of conditioning that said, "Turn around, Eleanor. Fix it. Apologize. Write the check. Make it go away. Be the good mother. Be the invisible, bankrupt, dying inside good mother." I walked in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I don't know why I expected something grand. Marble pillars, polished wood, the kind of room you see in movies where justice happens in dramatic lighting. This was just a room. Government-issued chairs, a judge's bench that looked like it had been refinished twice and needed a third, a ceiling tile in the corner that was water-stained and slightly crooked. This was where families came apart. This was where the paperwork of heartbreak got filed. I sat down next to Victor at our table, and I looked across the room, and there she was, Lila. She looked different, thinner. Her hair was down, unwashed, or at least not styled the way she usually styled it. That careful, effortless look she maintained like a full-time job. She was wearing a sweater I didn't recognize, dark gray, too big for her. It might have been Grant's. She wasn't wearing makeup, which was unusual for Lila, who never left the house without what she called her face, a ritual I'd watched her develop in high school and perfect in adulthood. The art of presenting a polished version of yourself to a world you assumed was always judging. She wasn't polished today. She looked like what she was, a 34-year-old woman about to lose her house. Grant sat next to her. He was wearing a suit I'd never seen, ill-fitting, borrowed, or rented, the jacket too tight in the shoulders. He sat with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the table in front of him like he was trying to bore a hole through it with sheer resentment. Their attorney, Barlow, was between them. A man in his 50s with thinning hair and a briefcase that looked like it had been through a war. Victor was right. He wasn't great. Leela looked at me. I looked at her. And for 1 second, one heartbeat, one breath, I saw the little girl. The one with the gap-toothed smile and the dandelion and the cold feet under the covers during thunderstorms. She was in there somewhere, behind the resentment and the fear and the years of entitlement I had built around her like a fortress she never asked to leave. Then the second passed. And the woman in the gray sweater looked away, and the judge entered the room. His name was Judge Whitfield, late 60s, reading glasses on a chain like Ingrid at the cafe. He had the face of a man who had heard 10,000 stories of human failure and had stopped being surprised by any of them, but hadn't stopped caring, which is a combination so rare it should be classified as a superpower. He sat down. He opened a file. He looked at both tables. He started. "This is the matter of Shaw versus Monroe, case number 2024-PR-04817, petition for partition of real property located at 1847 Wexford Lane. I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Let me hear from the petitioner first." Victor stood. He was good. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just clear and relentless, the way water is clear and relentless when it's cutting through rock. He laid out the facts on the down payment, the title, my name on the deed, the pattern of financial support totaling over $460,000, the second mortgage taken without my knowledge or consent. He presented the documents, the checks, the bank statements, the title records, 14 years of paper evidence, organized chronologically, Each entry a drop of blood I donated to a cause that never thanked me. Judge Whitfield listened. He read. He asked questions. When Victor got to the second mortgage, the judge stopped him. Mr. Hale, you're saying the $65,000 second mortgage was obtained without the knowledge or consent of the co-owner? That's correct, Your Honor. My client's name is on the deed. She was not notified, was not present at the closing of the second loan, and did not sign any documents authorizing it. The judge looked at Barlow. Counsel? Barlow stood. He was sweating. I could see it from across the room, a thin sheen on his forehead, the way his hand gripped his pen too tightly. He launched into an argument about the down payment being an implied gift, about family customs, about how parents routinely help their children purchase homes without expecting legal ownership. It wasn't a bad argument in theory. In practice, it collapsed under the weight of one simple fact. My name was on the deed. Not because of a gift, because of ownership. Your Honor, the respondents maintain that Mrs. Shaw's contribution was a parental gift, consistent with common practice, and that her presence on the title was a procedural inclusion, not an assertion of ownership rights. Judge Whitfield looked at him over his reading glasses. Mr. Barlow, I've been doing this for a long time. A name on a deed is not a procedural inclusion. It's a legal designation of ownership. If the respondents believed otherwise, they had 14 years to correct the title. They didn't. Barlow sat down. Grant whispered something in his ear. Barlow shook his head. Then the judge did something I didn't expect. He asked to hear from me directly. Mrs. Shaw, I'd like you to tell me, in your own words, what you're asking this court to do and why. Victor touched my arm. I stood. My legs were still heavy, but my voice, that voice that had disappeared on my birthday, that had packed up and left when Lila told me to vanish, my voice was there. It was there because I'd spent 13 days in Austria learning how to find it. It was there because Ingrid had told me I looked like a woman taking off a heavy coat. It was there because I'd rehearsed in my apartment for 17 days, standing in front of my bathroom mirror, talking to my own reflection like a woman practicing for the most important conversation of her life. Which it was. Your Honor, I'm 67 years old. I'm a retired nurse. I worked for 31 years in a hospital, mostly night shifts, mostly holidays, mostly the shifts nobody else wanted. I raised my daughter alone. Her father left when she was 3. I never remarried. I never had another child. I put everything I had, everything, into Lila. I paused. Not for effect, because my throat was closing. I swallowed. I kept going. Over the past 14 years, I gave my daughter and her husband more than $460,000. I paid for her wedding. I paid for her car. I paid for her children's medical bills. I paid for repairs and renovations and emergencies and debts that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared into nothing. I never kept a ledger at the time because I didn't think I needed one. She was my daughter. I trusted her. I could feel Lila's eyes on me. I didn't look at her. Not yet. I paid the down payment on the house on Wexford Lane, $42,000. My name was put on the deed. I didn't know that at the time, or if I did, I didn't understand what it meant. I was just a mother helping her child buy a home. That's all I thought I was doing. Judge Whitfield was writing. I waited for him to look up. When he did, I continued. 6 months ago, I gave Lila $8,000 to catch up on the mortgage. She told me it was 2 months behind. The money didn't go to the mortgage. It went to credit card bills and other expenses. I didn't find out until October, on my birthday, when I visited the house, and Lila told me the mortgage was still behind. And what happened on your birthday, Mrs. Shaw? I closed my eyes, opened them. My daughter told me that her life would be easier if I wasn't around anymore, if I was just gone. The courtroom was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The water-stained ceiling tile hung in the corner like it was listening. I left. I went home. And for the first time in 34 years, I stopped and looked at what I had been doing. Not just the giving, but the pattern of it. The way it had become my identity. The way I had taught everyone, including myself, that my value was measured by what I could provide. And I realized that I had been so busy being needed that I had forgotten to be respected. I took a breath. I'm not asking this court to punish my daughter. I'm asking this court to acknowledge that I exist, not as a bank account, not as an emergency fund, not as a name on a deed that nobody bothered to tell me about, but as a person. A co-owner of a property that a second mortgage was taken against without my consent. A woman who gave nearly $500,000 to a family that told her to disappear. I'm asking for what's mine, not because I want revenge, because I need to survive. Because I'm 67 years old and I live in a one-bedroom apartment and I eat store-brand cereal and I have nothing left. And the people I gave everything to are sitting across from me right now in a house I paid for, calling me cruel. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Victor put his hand on the table near mine, not touching, just close enough to say, "You did fine. You did fine." Judge Whitfield was quiet for a long time. He looked at the documents. He looked at me. He looked at Lila and Grant. Then he spoke. "I'm going to take a brief recess. When we return, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Monroe." The recess was 15 minutes. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall and pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the door and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way I used to coach patients who were panicking before a procedure. Calm breaths, steady breaths. "You're going to be fine." I said it to 1,000 strangers over 31 years. Now I was saying it to myself. When I came back, the courtroom had a different energy. Something had shifted. I could feel it the way you feel a weather change. The pressure dropping, the air thinning, the sense that something is about to break. Lila was standing. Barlow had asked her to make a statement. She looked at the judge. Then she looked at me. And what I saw in her face was not the cold woman from the birthday, not the angry woman from the text messages. What I saw was fear. Raw, unpolished, stripped down fear. The kind of fear you see in someone who is finally realizing that the safety net they've been standing on their whole life is not made of steel. It's made of one person. And that person just stepped aside. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was thin. Not weak. Lila was never weak. But thin, like it was being squeezed through a space that was too narrow for everything she needed to say. "My mother has been a part of my life every single day for as long as I can remember. She was always there, always helping, always showing up with food or money or solutions to problems I didn't even know I had yet. And I took that for granted. I know I did. I know I took her for granted." She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Grant put his hand on her back. She shook it off. He pulled away, looking stung. "But what she's doing now, this lawsuit, this forced sale, it's going to destroy us. My children are going to lose their home. My husband and I are going to lose everything we've built. And she knows that. She knows exactly what this will do to us, and she's doing it anyway." She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "I said something terrible to her on her birthday. I know that. I said something I should never have said, and I can't take it back. But does one awful sentence on one awful day, does that erase everything? Does that erase 34 years of being her daughter? Does that mean she gets to take my home?" I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say, "It wasn't one sentence, Lila. It was 14 years. It was every unreturned dollar, and every unspoken thank you, and every midnight phone call, and every time you rolled your eyes when I tried to help, and every time Grant looked at me like I was furniture. It was the $65,000 mortgage you took behind my back. It was the way you used my grandchildren as hostages the moment I stopped paying. It wasn't one sentence. It was a lifetime of small, daily, invisible erasures. And the sentence on my birthday was just the one that finally made me hear what you'd been saying all along. But I didn't stand up. I sat there. I let her talk. Because she had the right to talk, and the judge needed to hear both sides. And because some part of me, the part that would always be her mother, no matter what, needed to hear her say it out loud. Needed to hear her admit, even partially, even with conditions and qualifications and blame still pointed mostly at me, that she had done wrong. She talked for 10 more minutes. About the children, about their bedrooms and their school and their friends on the block. About how Margot had started wetting the bed again since all this started, a detail that hit me like a brick to the chest, and I'm sure she knew it would. About how Theo had stopped talking at dinner and spent hours in his room building things with Legos that he immediately destroyed, building and destroying, which sounded like a metaphor for everything but was really just a 9-year-old boy trying to process a chaos he couldn't name. When she finished, she sat down. Grant put his hand on her back again. This time she let him. Judge Whitfield removed his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He put them back on. I've heard both parties. I've reviewed the documentation. Here's what I see. He leaned forward. Mrs. Shaw is a titled co-owner of the property at 1847 Wexford Lane. The documentation supports this. The second mortgage was obtained without her knowledge or consent, which is a serious matter that I will address separately. The primary mortgage is now 3 months in arrears, and foreclosure proceedings have been initiated by the lender. He paused. Mrs. Monroe, I understand your concern for your children. As a parent and a grandparent myself, I take that concern seriously. But the law is not an instrument of emotion. It is a framework for resolving disputes that emotion alone cannot resolve. Your mother is a legal co-owner of this property. She has a right to petition for partition. And in light of the foreclosure already underway, the practical reality is that this property is going to be sold, whether through this court or through the bank. Lila made a sound, not a word. A sound, like the air being squeezed out of something alive. I am ordering a court-supervised sale of the property at 1847 Wexford Lane. The proceeds will be distributed after satisfaction of the primary and secondary mortgages and all associated liens. Mrs. Shaw's ownership interest will be calculated based on the title records and her documented financial contributions. I am also referring the matter of the unauthorized second mortgage to the appropriate authorities for review. He looked at both tables, at me, at Lila, at Grant, whose face had gone the color of ash. This is not a punishment. This is a resolution. I encourage both parties to use the time between now and the sale to consider what they want their relationship to look like going forward, because the house is just a house. The family, whatever's left of it, will have to be rebuilt by choice, not by obligation. He closed the file. He stood. The bailiff called the room to order, and it was over. Except it wasn't over. It was never going to be that simple. The walk out of the courtroom was the longest 30 feet of my life. Victor was beside me, talking in a low voice about next steps and timelines and how the sale would be handled. I wasn't hearing most of it. I was watching Lila and Grant ahead of us in the hallway, moving toward the exit, Barlow trailing behind them like a man who knew he'd lost and was already mentally composing his invoice. I expected Lila to leave, to walk out the door and disappear into her car and drive away without looking back. That's what the texts had promised. You are dead to me. Dead people don't get goodbye looks. But she stopped. Right at the courthouse doors, where the hallway met the lobby and the floor changed from linoleum to tile. She stopped and she turned around and she looked at me. And the distance between us, 20 feet, maybe less, felt like the entire length of her life. Mom, I stopped walking. Victor stopped beside me. Are you happy now? She asked. Her voice was flat, empty. The voice of a woman who had just heard a judge tell her she was going to lose her home and hadn't processed it yet and was running on whatever fuel is left when hope burns out. I looked at my daughter, at the woman I had given everything to, the woman I had sacrificed my savings, my retirement, my comfort, my self-respect, my identity for, the woman who had used my love as a credit card and my guilt as a cosigner. No, I said. I'm not happy. Then why? Because happy isn't the point, Lila. The point is that I deserve to matter. Not just when you need something. Not just when the mortgage is late or the car breaks down or the credit cards are maxed out. I deserve to matter on a Tuesday in October when I show up with a cake and the only thing I'm bringing is myself. She stared at me. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled. You always mattered, Mom. No, sweetheart, I didn't, and we both know it. I walked past her, out the courthouse doors, into the January cold, where the air hit my face like a slap, and the sky was that pale, washed-out gray I remembered from my birthday. From the morning this whole thing began, from the day I drove 35 minutes with a strawberry cake and came home carrying a wound I'd been wearing like a second skin my entire life. Victor drove me home. We didn't talk. He parked in front of my building, and I sat in the passenger seat for a moment, looking at the front door of my apartment building. The chipped paint, the buzzers that half worked, the mailbox with my name on a piece of tape that was starting to peel. Mrs. Shaw? Yes. You did well today. Did I? Because it feels like I just burned down a house. You didn't burn it down. It was already on fire. You just stopped throwing your body on the flames. I looked at him. This man. This attorney I'd found online and hired with money I could barely afford. This stranger who had become, in the space of 3 months, one of the only people in my life who treated me like a person with rights instead of a person with obligations. Thank you, Victor. That's what I'm here for. I went inside. I made soup. I sat at my kitchen table. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check my phone. I looked at the blue bird on the windowsill, and I thought about Hallstatt, about the lake, about Ingrid and her crosswords, about the cafe and the pastry and the cold, clear air that tasted like freedom and tasted like loss and tasted like both at the same time, because that's what freedom is when you earn it late in life. It always comes with the shadow of what it cost. The house sold in March. A young couple bought it. Newlyweds, Victor told me, first-time homebuyers. I hoped they were happy. I hoped they had better luck in that house than we did. I hoped they locked the front door and paid their mortgage on time and didn't call anyone's mother at midnight asking for money they'd never return. The proceeds were distributed according to the court order, after the primary mortgage was paid off and the second mortgage was settled, which ate up a huge chunk. And after fees and taxes and all the ugly arithmetic of a life coming apart, my share came to $112,000. $112,000, less than a quarter of what I'd given, but more than nothing, more than the zero I would have gotten if I'd stayed silent and kept writing checks and kept being the ATM in the navy blouse. Lila and Grant moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. I know this because Doris told me. Not because Lila told me. Lila hadn't spoken to me since the courthouse hallway. The silence was loud and constant, and it lived in my apartment like a third occupant, filling the space between the walls with all the conversations we weren't having. I put the money in a high-yield savings account. I didn't spend it on anyone. I didn't send it to Lila. I didn't put it in a joint account. I didn't earmark it for grandchildren's college funds or emergency bailouts or any of the 1,000 ways I used to hemorrhage money into other people's lives. I saved it. For myself. For the woman who had earned it and deserved it and was finally, at 67 years old, learning that she was allowed to keep what was hers. The months after the sale were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Not peaceful. Not yet. Quiet the way an operating room is quiet after a surgery. The patient is still alive, but the monitors are beeping and the outcome is uncertain and everyone is holding their breath. I went to my apartment. I ate my soup. I walked to the park. I called Doris. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years and never had time for because I was always on the phone or in the car or at the bank or standing in Lila's kitchen putting away groceries nobody thanked me for. I started writing. That surprised me more than anything. I'd never been a writer, never kept a journal, never wrote letters beyond the obligatory Christmas cards I stopped sending 3 years ago because I couldn't afford the stamps. But one night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the bluebird watching from the windowsill, I opened my laptop and I started typing. Not a diary, not a letter to Lila, a story. My story. The whole thing, from the double shifts to the down payment to the birthday to the courthouse. All of it, set down in words that nobody would read except me, and maybe that was enough. Maybe putting it down was enough. I wrote under a made-up name. Not because I was ashamed, because the story wasn't about Eleanor Shaw. It was about every mother who ever gave too much and woke up one day in an empty apartment wondering where her life went. It was about every parent who mistook sacrifice for love and silence for peace and financial rescue for connection. It could be anyone's story. That was the point. That was the whole terrible, universal, gut-wrenching point. In April, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned, over the past 6 months, that unknown numbers rarely brought good news. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was the time of day, late afternoon, when the light through my window was soft and gold and made my apartment look almost beautiful. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the part of me that was still a mother, still listening, still hoping. Mrs. Shaw, this is Principal Nguyen from Westfield Elementary. I'm calling about your grandson, Theodore Monroe. My stomach dropped. Is he okay? Is he hurt? He's fine. He's not hurt. But he asked his teacher today if he could use the office phone to call you. And when we asked for your number, he recited it from memory. All 10 digits. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "My Nana is the best doctor in the whole world, and I haven't seen her in a long time, and I think she might be lonely." I pressed my hand to my mouth. The kitchen blurred. The bluebird blurred. Everything blurred except the sound of that woman's voice telling me that my 9-year-old grandson had memorized my phone number and asked a stranger for permission to call me because he thought I might be lonely. "Mrs. Shaw, are you still there?" "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm here. Is it possible to talk to him?" "I'm sorry, we'd need parental authorization to facilitate that, but I wanted you to know. He misses you. He talks about you often." I thanked her. I hung up. I put the phone down on the table and I sat there for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just feeling. Feeling the full weight of what this had cost. Not the money, not the house, the children, my grandchildren, the ones who had done nothing wrong, the ones who were collateral damage in a war between adults who should have known better. All of us, every single one of us, should have known better. Theo remembered my number. He thought I was lonely. He was right. That night, I took the envelope out of my nightstand drawer, the one that said, "For me." I read my terms, all 3 pages, plus the line at the bottom about not being stolen from, in silence. And I added one more line, the last one, the one that mattered most. "I will find a way back to the children, on my terms, without surrendering myself." I put the envelope away. I turned off the light, and in the dark, in the quiet, in the small apartment that was mine and only mine, I held that sentence in my chest like a seed and waited for it to grow. Summer came and went the way summers do when you're paying attention to them for the first time in decades. Slowly, fully, with all its heat and noise and lazy afternoons that used to belong to other people's emergencies but now belong to me. I ate peaches from the farmer's market that I bought with my own money and didn't feel guilty about. I sat in the park and read novels that had nothing to do with anyone's problems. I went to bed when I was tired and woke up when I was rested and didn't check my phone first thing in the morning because nobody was calling at dawn with a crisis that required my checkbook and my spine. The Saturday visits continued, every week, rain or shine, through June and July and into August, when the city sweated and the pavement shimmered and Margot decided she didn't like tangerines anymore, she liked grapes, and Theo announced he was done with dinosaurs and had moved on to space, specifically black holes, which he tried to explain to me with the seriousness of a tenured professor and the vocabulary of a 10-year-old. And I listened to every word because listening, just listening, without fixing or funding or rescuing, was the skill I was still learning. Lila and I circled each other during those visits like 2 people sharing a kitchen who weren't sure whose turn it was at the stove. We were polite. We were careful. We exchanged information about the children the way coworkers exchange information about shared projects. Efficient, necessary, stripped of emotion. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile. And after months of warfare, the absence of hostility felt like progress. Then came the Saturday in August that changed things again. Not because of something dramatic, because of something small. Because that's how real change works. Not in courtrooms or legal filings or explosive text messages, but in the tiny, almost invisible moments where someone chooses differently and the other person notices. I was sitting on Lila's couch reading a book about the solar system with Theo. He had moved on from black holes to Saturn's rings, a lateral move I fully supported, when Margot came out of the kitchen holding a plate. On the plate was a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, cut in triangles, not squares, the way I cut them. The way I had always cut them for Lila when she was Margot's age, because Lila insisted that triangles tasted better than squares. And I never argued because what mother argues with a child about the geometry of sandwiches? "Nana, Mommy made you lunch," Margot said. I looked up. Over Margot's head through the kitchen doorway, I could see Lila standing at the counter. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the counter, at her hands, at nothing. The way you look when you've just done something vulnerable and you're not sure how it's going to land. She made me a sandwich. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? After everything, the $463,000, the second mortgage, the birthday, the courthouse, the text messages, the silence, the mediation, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cut in triangles is what cracked me open. But that's the truth. That's how stupid and beautiful and irrational the human heart is. You can survive betrayal and theft and cruelty and legal battles and months of estrangement, and then someone cuts the sandwich into triangles and you have to press your face into a 10-year-old's book about Saturn so nobody sees you cry. I ate the sandwich. It was good. The peanut butter was the cheap kind, crunchy, store brand, the jar with the yellow label I recognized from my own pantry. She was buying the cheap kind now. Like me. Like her mother. When the kids went to the bedroom to play, I stood in the kitchen doorway. Lila was washing dishes. There was no dishwasher in this apartment. The house on Wexford Lane had a dishwasher. A nice one, stainless steel, part of the kitchen renovation I paid $6,000 toward. Now she was washing dishes by hand in a kitchen the size of my bathroom, and the water was too hot, and her hands were red, and she didn't complain. "Thank you for the sandwich," I said. She kept washing. "It's just a sandwich, Mom." "I know what it is." She turned off the water. She stood there with her back to me, her shoulders tight, her wet hands dripping onto the floor. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Do what?" "This. You and me. I don't know what we are now. We're not what we were. The you give and I take thing, that's over. I know that. I get it. But I don't know what we are instead. I don't know how to be your daughter without the money being in the middle of it. It's like the money was the language we spoke, and now that it's gone, I don't have the words." I leaned against the doorframe. The same kind of doorframe I'd grabbed for balance the first Saturday when Theo hit me like a small, bony missile. This apartment was full of doorframes I'd leaned on. Maybe that's what doorframes were for, giving you something solid when the ground was shifting. "I don't know how to do this either," I said. "I've never had a relationship with you that didn't involve me paying for something. Since the day you were born, love and money were the same thing in my head. I loved you, so I paid. You needed something, so I paid. You were hurting, so I paid. And somewhere along the way, the pain became the love. And without it, I didn't know what I was to you. Just some old woman with opinions about your fridge." She laughed. It came out choked and wet, more cry than laugh. But it was there. The sound of it filled the small kitchen the way a light fills a room. Not perfectly, not evenly, but enough. "You were never just that, Mom." "I was, Lila. And you let me be, because it was easier. For both of us." She turned around. Her eyes were red. Her hands were dripping. She looked like what she was. A 34-year-old woman standing in a kitchen she didn't choose, in a life she didn't plan, learning how to be a person without a safety net for the first time, and terrified and tired and trying. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I said on your birthday, for the money, for the mortgage, the second one. I know about it now. Grant told me everything after the hearing. I didn't know when he took it out. I swear I didn't know. And when I found out, Lila. I threw a plate at him, a dinner plate. It broke against the wall and the kids were in the other room, and I screamed at him for 20 minutes, and he just stood there and took it, and that was the night I realized, "Lila, stop." She stopped. Her breath was coming in short, ragged pulls, the way patients breathe when they're trying not to panic and losing the fight. I'd seen this 1,000 times, in hospital beds, in waiting rooms, in the eyes of people who were about to receive news that would change everything and couldn't do a thing to stop it. "Sit down," I said. She sat. At the kitchen table, a small round thing, press board, bought at a discount furniture store, wobbling slightly on the uneven floor. I sat across from her. The table was so small our knees almost touched. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," I said, "because it's not. What happened, all of it, not just the birthday, all of it, it was not okay. The money, the lies, the second mortgage, the way you used Theo and Margot to punish me when I stopped paying, none of it was okay." She nodded. The tears kept falling. She didn't wipe them. "But I'm going to tell you something else, something I should have told you a long time ago, maybe when you were 15 and I was writing checks for things you didn't need. Maybe when you were 20 and I was covering rent you should have earned. Maybe when you were 28 and I was handing you $42,000 without a contract or a conversation or a single boundary. I should have said this then. I'm saying it now." I reached across the wobbly table and I took her wet, red dish soap hands in mine. "You are capable. You are smart. You are strong enough to stand on your own feet, and you always were. I just never let you find out. And that was my failure. Not yours." She broke. Not the quiet, tears-leaking crying from the mediation. The real thing. The ugly, gasping, snot noise crying that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. She broke and I held her hands across that cheap table, and I let her cry because sometimes that's all a mother can do. Not fix it, not pay for it, not rescue anyone from anything, just sit there and hold on and let the person you love fall apart so they can put themselves back together in a shape that's actually theirs. We sat there for a long time. The kitchen was quiet except for her breathing and the occasional sound from the bedroom. Theo and Margot playing, arguing about something, a small crash followed by giggles, the chaos of childhood proceeding as scheduled regardless of whatever the adults were doing or feeling or destroying. When she finally stopped crying, she looked at me with swollen eyes and a face that was blotchy and raw and completely unpretentious for maybe the first time in her adult life. "I got a raise," she said. "What?" "At the restaurant. They promoted me to shift lead. It's only an extra $2 an hour, but it's something. I earned it. Me. Not you. Not Grant. Me. $2 an hour. $80 a week before taxes. In the world I'd come from, the world of $42,000 checks and $8,000 bailouts and $6,000 sunrooms, $80 a week was nothing. It was a rounding error. It was the amount I used to slip into Lila's purse without thinking about it. But sitting across from my daughter at a pressboard table in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, $80 a week was everything. It was proof that she could do something hard and be recognized for it, proof that the world would reward her if she showed up and worked and didn't wait for someone else to catch her fall, proof that Eleanor Shaw's money was not the only currency in her daughter's life. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it. Not the reflexive, hollow, proud of you that parents say to children who bring home participation trophies. The real kind. The kind that costs something to say because it requires admitting that the other person did something you didn't think they could do. I was proud of my daughter for earning $2 an hour more at a restaurant job she would have considered beneath her 8 months ago. And that pride was worth more than $463,000 because it was clean. It was earned. Nobody owed anybody anything for it. Fall arrived. The leaves turned. The air sharpened. The Saturdays continued. And slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't notice it happening, things began to change. Not perfectly. Not smoothly. Not in a straight line. Change never moves in a straight line. It zigzags. It doubles back. It stalls. It moves forward 3 steps and backward 2. And some days you feel like you're making progress, and other days you feel like you're right back where you started. Sitting in your car in a driveway, staring at a dashboard while your heart rebuilds itself from scratch. But the direction was forward. I knew that because of the small things. Lila started calling me. Not every day, not with emergencies, just calls. Short ones. "Mom, Margot lost a tooth. She put it under her pillow and I gave her $1. Is $1 enough? I don't even know what the going rate is." Or, "Mom, can you tell me how you made that lentil soup? The one with whatever vegetables are about to go bad? I have a bag of carrots and half an onion and I don't want to waste them." Or once, late at night, her voice small and uncertain. "Mom, do you think I'm a good mother?" That last one. That one gutted me. Not because of the question itself. Every mother asks it. Every mother doubts it. Every mother lies awake at 2 a.m. wondering if the choices she made today are the ones that end up on a therapist's couch 20 years from now. It gutted me because she was asking me. She was asking the woman she'd told to disappear. She was asking because, despite everything, despite the birthday and the courthouse, and the 12 text messages, and the months of silence, I was still her mother. And mothers, even the ones who fail, especially the ones who fail, are the mirror that daughters hold up when they need to see themselves clearly. "Yes," I said, "you're a good mother. You're learning, you're tired, you're making it up as you go. But you show up every day and you love those kids with your whole chest, and that's what it is, Lila. That's the whole job." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Is that what you did?" "That's what I tried to do. I got the details wrong, most of them. But the showing up part, that part I did." "Yeah," she said, "you did." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. A small, fragile, imperfect acknowledgement that landed between us like a leaf, weightless and temporary, and somehow enough to change the color of the landscape. In October, I turned 68. I didn't make a strawberry cake. I didn't drive 35 minutes to a house that no longer existed. I didn't show up uninvited carrying groceries and expectations. I woke up at 5. The body remembers, always. And I made coffee, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I looked at the blue bird on the windowsill, and I thought, I'm 68. I'm alive. I have $112,000 in a savings account that belongs to me. I have an apartment with a radiator that clicks and a window that faces east. I have a friend named Doris and a lawyer named Victor and a German woman named Ingrid who taught me that some coats are too heavy to wear. I have a story I'm writing under a name that isn't mine. I have 2 grandchildren who know my phone number. And I have a daughter who is learning to stand. That's what I have. And for the first time in my life, it's enough. My phone buzzed at 8, a text from Lila. Just 2 words. Happy birthday. Then a minute later, can we come over? I stared at the message. She'd never come to my apartment, not once. In all the years I'd lived there, Lila had never visited. I always went to her. I always drove. I always showed up. The traffic flowed one way, from me to her. Always. Because I was the giver and she was the receiver. And that was the architecture of our relationship, as fixed and immovable as the foundation of a house that no longer belonged to either of us. But here she was, asking to come to me, to my apartment. The small one. The 1 bedroom with the secondhand furniture and the leaky sink and the radiator that clicked. The one I'd been embarrassed by for years because it was proof that I'd given everything away. Proof that a woman who spent $500,000 on her daughter's life lived in a place that cost $900 a month and smelled like lentil soup. Yes, I typed back. Come. I looked at her. At this woman. This complicated, infuriating, imperfect, growing woman. The one who told me to disappear. The one who stole from me. The one who weaponized my grandchildren and orchestrated a smear campaign and sent 12 text messages, the last of which declared me dead. That woman was sitting in my kitchen, in the apartment she'd never visited, holding a canvas bag and offering me $500 of her own money. And the look on her face was not guilt or obligation or performance. It was something I had never seen on Lila Monroe's face before. Dignity. The dignity of a person who is doing something difficult because it's right. Not because someone forced them. Not because a court ordered it. Not because a lawyer drafted a demand letter. Because they woke up one morning and realized that being a real person means paying your debts. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily. Month by month, dollar by dollar. Honest dollar by honest dollar. I'll accept it, I said. One condition. What? You don't ever stop. Not because I need the money. I have enough now. But because the act of paying it means you remember. It means you're accounting for what happened. And the day you stop, the day it becomes too inconvenient or too painful or too much work, is the day we lose what we're building right now. She nodded. No argument, no eye roll, no sigh of dismissal, just a nod. I put the check in my pocket. I would cash it on Monday. I would put it in my savings account. And every month after that, I would receive a check for $500. And I would cash it. And it would mean something that had nothing to do with the money. Grant came back with the kids. Margot had found a neighbor's cat in the hallway and was devastated that she couldn't bring it home. Theo had discovered that the fire extinguisher had an expiration date and was concerned about building safety. I told him I'd mention it to the landlord. He said he would write a letter. I said that was a good idea. He asked if I had a stamp. I gave him a stamp. They left at noon. 4 of them. Filing down the stairs and into the car with the dented bumper. Margot waved from the window. Theo gave me a thumbs up. Grant started the engine. Lila stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at my window. I was standing there, watching. She raised her hand. Not a wave. Something smaller. Something more like a salute or a signal or a promise. I raised mine back. Then she got in the car, and they drove away. I stood at my window for a long time after they left. The apartment was quiet again. Carlos the bluebird watched the street from the sill. The world's toughest Nana mug sat on the table, empty, already stained with coffee I would never wash out because some stains are worth keeping. I thought about the past year, about the birthday and the cake and the words, about the box on Victor's table and the numbers that added up to a life spent in service of someone else's comfort, about the closed bank account and the 12 text messages and the summons, and the courtroom and Judge Whitfield, and the partition and the sale, and the hallway where Lila asked if I was happy, and I said no because happy wasn't the point. I thought about Hallstatt, the lake, the mountains, Ingrid and her crossword puzzles and her advice. Don't pick it up again. Helga at the hotel. The green coat I bought at full price. The blue bird in the Christmas market. The cold, clean air that tasted like nothing and everything. I thought about Doris on her porch with Herbert the cat. About Victor in his windowless conference room with his steady voice and his devastating clarity. About Principal Nguyen calling to tell me that my grandson had memorized my phone number and thought I might be lonely. About Dr. Meeks and the beige room and the angled chairs and the tissue box that never ran out. I thought about Theo hitting me like a missile in the doorway. About Margot leaning against my side. About the dinosaur book and the Saturn book and the tangerines and the grapes. About the peanut butter sandwich cut in triangles. About the mug with the crooked handwriting. About the $500 check in my pocket. I thought about all of it. Every piece, every wound, every decision. Every night I lay awake, and every morning I got up anyway. And I understood something that I don't think I could have understood a year ago, back when I was frosting a strawberry cake at 5 a.m. for a woman who didn't deserve it. I was not the same person. I would never be the same person. The Eleanor who showed up at Wexford Lane with a cake and a bag of groceries and decades of unexamined martyrdom. She was gone. Not dead, just retired. Like the nurse. Like the double shifts. Like the midnight phone calls and the emergency checks and the whole exhausting apparatus of a life built around the needs of someone who never once asked how I was doing. That Eleanor gave everything away and called it love. This Eleanor, the one standing at the window, holding an empty mug, watching a car with a dented bumper drive away. This Eleanor understood something the old one never did. Love is not what you give. Love is not the check or the cake or the groceries, or the down payment, or the second chance, or the third chance, or the 50th chance. Love is not sacrifice. Love is not performance. Love is not the thing you do to prove you deserve to be in someone's life. Love is the thing that remains after you stop doing all of that. After you close the account and file the papers and sit in a courtroom and draw your lines and say no and mean it. After you fly to a country where nobody knows your name and eat pastry with a stranger and come home and face the silence. After you hold your grandchild and don't slip money into anyone's purse. After you accept a $500 check from a daughter who is learning, finally, that giving and receiving are both forms of respect. Love is what survives the boundary. That's the test. That's the only test. If it dies when you stop paying for it, it was never love. It was a transaction, and transactions don't hug you in doorways. Transactions don't memorize your phone number. Transactions don't cut sandwiches into triangles because that's how your mother used to do it. I picked up the mug. I washed it. Carefully, because Theo's handwriting was permanent marker, not paint, and I didn't want it to fade. I dried it. I put it in the cabinet in the front, where I would see it every morning when I reached for the coffee. Then I sat down at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop, and I finished writing the story. My story, the whole thing. From the cake to the courtroom to the window where I stood on my 68th birthday and watched my daughter drive away in a car with a dented bumper and a $500 check that said more than $463,000 ever did. I wrote the last line and I closed the laptop and I sat in the quiet and I felt not happy, not sad, not triumphant, not grieving. I felt real, present, accounted for. A woman who existed in her own life, not as a footnote in someone else's. The afternoon light came through the window and touched Carlos, and the bluebird glowed. The radiator clicked. The apartment hummed with its small, familiar sounds. The building settling, the neighbors living, the city breathing outside the glass. My city, my building, my apartment, my life. I opened the nightstand drawer one final time. I took out the envelope. For me. I read my terms. All of them. Every line. Every word I'd written in the shaking handwriting of a woman learning to be solid. And then I did something I didn't expect. I folded the pages. I put them back in the envelope. And I moved the envelope from the nightstand to the kitchen cabinet, next to the world's toughest Nana mug. Not hidden, not secret, not a survival document kept next to painkillers and reading glasses for emergencies. A reminder. A compass. A record of the year, a 67-year-old retired nurse from Birch Street stopped setting herself on fire and let the people around her learn to stay warm on their own. I closed the cabinet. I opened the window. The evening air came in, warm, end of summer warm, carrying the smell of someone's grill and someone's radio and someone's life happening just beyond the glass. A dog barked. A car horn. A child laughing somewhere, the unself-conscious, full-throated laughter of a kid who has no idea how complicated things get later. I stood there, at my window, in my apartment, on my birthday, alone and not lonely, quiet and not empty. 68 years old and just beginning. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check if someone needed me. I didn't calculate what I could give or what it would cost or what I'd have left afterward. I just stood there, breathing, being enough.